Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive roadblock in the auto world right now. Why on earth has the 2026 electric vehicle market just stalled? We're going to share some fascinating key insights about the human mind that explain this bizarre technological crossroads, essentially giving you a roadmap for understanding why consumers are resisting so hard. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's the wild situation we find ourselves in. Even though 2026 EV technology has officially reached technical parity with traditional cars, meaning the batteries and charging infrastructure are fully mature and ready to go, people are still saying no thanks. We are definitely no longer facing a hardware bottleneck, we're facing a human bottleneck. In this explainer, we're going to explore how ancient philosophy, behavioral science, and the specific mindset of the late majority can actually help us solve this massive psychological crisis. We'll be structuring this explainer in 5 quick parts. First, the 2026 EV deadlock. Second, the philosophy of consumer resistance. Third, the psychology of refusal. Fourth, mapping the diffusion gap. And finally, strategies for market dominance. All right, part 1, the 2026 EV deadlock, moving way beyond the hardware. And that brings us to part 2, the philosophy of consumer resistance, where we'll explore the ancient roots of our modern tech refusal. To really understand this deadlock, we have to recognize how this consumer resistance brilliantly echoes Plato's allegory of the cave. Think about it. First century, drivers have lived in this sensory reality entirely defined by shadows. The roar of the engine, the vibration, those super familiar rituals like the distinct smell of a gas station. The resistant consumer feels incredibly safe in those shadows. So when we suddenly expose them to the logical light of the EV's benefits, like, hey, environmental sustainability, better total cost of ownership, their immediate reaction isn't gratitude. Honestly, it's pain. They react with hostility to protect themselves from a totally alien future they just aren't ready for. Next up, let's consider René Descartes. He famously warned about the intellect being completely clouded by the passions of the soul. And aren't we seeing exactly that play out today? Skeptics are letting their fear of change completely override rational logic. Instead of breaking down the EV transition into manageable logical components, like, separating your daily commuting range from those rare occasional long road trips, they view the EV as this one giant threatening monolith. Emotional safety completely wins out over scientific evaluation. So the crucial point here is beautifully captured by Aristotle, who said, habit is a second nature. A 20-year habit of driving a combustion engine creates a really profound stratification of identity. For these drivers, a car isn't just a tool to get from point A to point B, it's an extension of who they are. Changing to an EV isn't just picking out a new engine. To them, it feels like an absolute existential threat to their personal stability and their everyday routine. Which leads perfectly into part 3. The psychology of refusal. Let's look at the actual mental mechanics blocking this adoption. Behavioral economics shows us this incredibly powerful 2-to-1 ratio of loss aversion. Basically, the psychological pain of losing a familiar ritual, like that super easy 2-minute refueling stop, is literally twice as powerful to the human brain as the joy of long-term economic savings or a nice quiet ride. The brain weighs the loss of this familiar routine as a huge immediate threat, completely ignoring all those future gains. And notice how cognitive dissonance acts as a survival mechanism here. Imagine spending decades defining yourself as an internal combustion enthusiast. As EVs become objectively superior, admitting they're better feels a lot like admitting you're wrong your whole life. To resolve that mental short circuit, skeptics instinctively magnify negative news, like hyperbolized stories of rare battery fires or grid failures, and they use them as a psychological shield to defend their traditional automotive identity. Additionally, we really have to consider the powerlessness of the unknown. Shifting the terminology from liters and horsepower over to kilowatts and kilowatt hours, it introduces this steep, incredibly alienating learning curve. It completely strips consumers of their perceived expertise. Suddenly, knowing exactly how to change your oil means absolutely nothing. This feeling of technical inadequacy generates a massive wave of defensive refusal. People just retreat to what they know, simply because it makes them feel competent. Okay, part 4, mapping the diffusion gap and exactly where the market stands in 2026. Looking at the famous Rogers diffusion curve here, the innovators, the early adopters, and the pragmatic early majority, they've pretty much already made the switch by 2026. Our main obstacle right now is the 34% late majority. These are highly pragmatic skeptics who basically only change when they are forced to by market pressure. And the 16% laggards, who essentially view the thermal engine as the one and only right way to drive. For these remaining groups, the transition is basically an ideological war. The combustion engine represents freedom, masculinity, and do-it-yourself mastery. The EV, on the other hand, is perceived as this unserviceable, sanitized black box that threatens their social identity. And this is totally exacerbated by a massive observability gap. The best benefits of EVs, like waking up to a full battery from silent home charging, are entirely private. They're invisible. But the limits, like public charging queues during a busy holiday weekend, those are highly visible and completely dominate the social narrative. Bringing us to our final section, Part 5, Strategies for Market Dominance, where we turn these behavioral audits into real action. To successfully align with these consumers, we've got to completely overhaul our messaging. First, we must de-emphasize the radicalism, stop calling it a revolution, and instead frame the EV as an evolutionary upgrade, just the next logical step. Second, we must reframe the value. We have to pivot away from the green altruistic messaging, because that just triggers their ideological defense, right? Pivot towards energy autonomy, engineering precision, and protecting their wallets. And third, break those echo chambers by using relatable, peer-to-peer advocacy from the early majority. They trust their pragmatic neighbors way more than tech evangelists. Crucially, we absolutely must close that observability gap. We have to make EV integration seamless and, more importantly, visible. A major priority here is solving the condominium charging gap. When charging seamlessly integrates into existing urban life, the benefits shift from being hidden private experiences to highly observable, community-based success stories. And that wraps up our strategic breakdown of the 2026 automotive market. We've journeyed through the philosophy, psychology, and sociology of this wild technological transition. We want to warmly thank you for tuning in, and we deeply appreciate the valuable time you've spent with us today on this explainer. I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to consider. As we push forward into this electric future, are we truly fighting the limits of technology, or are we just fighting the limits of ourselves? Thanks for learning with us, and we'll see you on the next one.